So the aim in this lesson is to introduce Tinkercad and its basic functions and get you more familiar with the screen that you see in front of you and what various tools do within Tinkercad. And like most software packages, Tinkercad, when you move your mouse pointer over each of the tools, each of the options, it does give you a little text box that will tell you what those things will do. So we'll start off with looking at the toolbar. One of the first things that you want to do when you start a new file in Tinkercad is to go up to the name. Now I've already changed the name here, but it's good practice to change the name of your file so that you know what it is. You can just type into there whatever you want the name to be, and as it says there, change name, and when you're done, click off, and then you know what your design actually is. You've also got another button there for recent designs, and if you click on there it will take you in and you can start working on a different document or start a new design. And you've also got the Tinkercad logo there, and that will take you back to your dashboard, as it says there. Moving across the buttons along the top, you have a copy button, you have a paste button, you have a duplicate and repeat button, you have a delete button, you have an undo button, a redo button, and then as we go across to the right we have a button that will make notes visible or invisible. You have a show all button, you have a group button, an ungroup button, an align button, and a mirror button. And you'll also notice that as each of these, when you hover over each of these buttons, it does again tell you what it is, and it also gives you a keyboard shortcut. You also have your import button, and if you click on that it will take you to another pop-up where you can choose the file you're going to import, and you can also see the file types just here that you can import into Tinkercad. Same with the export button, and obviously we need to create something before we can export, but it does allow you to export your file either for 3D printing or for laser cutting or as an STL in itself. And you can also send to, which will allow you to send your file to Fusion or to save an image, and we will come back to that a little bit later in another lesson. You've also got some other buttons here. This allows you to select the work plane that you're going to be working on. You do need an object on your work plane before you can actually change that, and I will come back to that again in another lesson. We've also got a ruler, which when we click on it allows us to essentially position an origin on our work surface, on our work plane, and when we put an object onto our work plane it gives us a lot of information with regard to measurements, and again that's something that I will come back to in another lesson. And you can also add notes to your to the design that you've created. You've then got your shape menu. Okay, which is just on the right hand side here, and there are various different shapes that you can go through, various different sort of sub-menus within this, and again that's something we'll look at as we go through the lessons. In our basic shapes then, as you can see we've got basic shapes, and if we just scroll down you can see there's a good range of those to get you going when you're first starting out, and obviously as you change then to another sub-menu within our shapes it gives us different options. Okay, and there's a really wide range of different shapes that we can work with and use. For now, I'm just going to keep that on the basic shape or basic shapes. What you've also then got over on the left hand side is a series of tools that help us with our view, and the first one to have a look at is the cube in the top left hand corner, and this links directly to our work plane and our view of our work plane. So as I move my mouse over my cube, you can see it is highlighting different sections of it. Now, I have found that this doesn't work quite so well in Chrome. I'm using Edge at the moment, and that seems to work quite well in there in terms of highlighting which view you're going to go to. So if I move it over this right hand corner and I click on it, my view will change accordingly. If I move to the back corner, it will highlight and my view will rotate. I can go back to my front view, I can go on top, okay, I can click on a side view, and if I want to I can view my work from underneath as well. Okay, we've also got our home view, which takes us to the view of the work plane when we start our design, and we've got a couple of other different options there. We can, whatever we've created will fit into the view with our fit all in view button. We can zoom in, we can zoom out, and this one is quite useful because it changes the type of view that we are working with. At the moment, by default, it is in a perspective view, and you can see that because the lines are the grid on our work plane, the lines on the grid are getting closer together. If we switch to a perspective view, and I'll use the corner example for this, and you can see that the lines are now parallel, which is useful for creating an isometric view of our design. If I switch to the perspective view, you can see the difference. You can see the lines getting closer together the further they go away from us. It's up to you again which view you might want to work with, and it depends again on what you want to do with your design once you've created it. As I said, if you want to create maybe a more realistic view, you might use perspective. If you wanted to create something to go into your NEA or your control assessment to help you to work in isometric, you may well want to capture an image in isometric. Okay, I'm just going to switch back to perspective. You can also manipulate your work plane and your design using your mouse. Your mouse, you've got your middle button or your wheel on the mouse, and by scrolling on that you can zoom in and out, and by using the right mouse button, if I press that down and hold it down, I can rotate my screen and I can rotate my design. The left mouse button will allow me to draw a selection box, and if I press and hold the middle button, I can drag my work plane around to enable me to get a better view of what I'm creating. And it is important when you are creating stuff in CAD that you can manipulate your model to enable you to work with the best view and with more accuracy, and enable you to do what you need to do. It's important to be able to change your view to do that. Okay, so as you can see, very easy to do that. And you'll also notice that as I move the work plane, the cube in the top left hand corner also moves to follow, so I can quickly switch between different views and go back within that, and again using that to my advantage to help me to get the best view so I can carry out the action that I want to do within my design. Okay, then we go over to our basic shapes, and you have got two presets at the top here which are holes, and again I will come back to that a little bit later in this lesson. But then you have got various different shapes. And we're just going to start with a box shape, and you click on it and it selects it and allows you to position your shape anywhere on that work plane. Now at the moment all I can do is position my shape on the blue work plane. Can't move it up or down at the moment, I can just position it on my work plane. And what I tend to do here is use my grid, and if you look at the grid you can see there are the slightly thicker darker blue lines. I tend to use that to help me to position my object. Okay, and when I've now placed my object, what I can do is manipulate that object. I have a series of different boxes around the outside, and by pressing and holding my mouse, my left mouse button, I can move those and resize and rescale my design. And the different handles or the different boxes themselves that we see here that highlight as we go over them enable us to alter different sizes of our shape of our object. So we have, as you can see here, when I just move my mouse pointer over it, it highlights, it changes colour, turns red, and we can also see the dimension that it currently has. And it's the same on each of these, and if we use a corner it will show us the 2 dimensions and allow us to change the 2 dimensions at the same time. And in terms of the dimensions, as we can see here, it's got 26. Our grid, the size of our grid, if you look just down to the bottom right, you can see snap grid, and it shows us the size there. So each of the individual lines is spaced at 1 millimeter, and my object, my shape, will snap to that 1 millimeter spacing as I change the size. You can change that, you can be a little bit more accurate if you need. You do have a brick option in there as well, because you do have an option within this to look at and create your design in bricks or blocks from Minecraft. So you do have those options, but for what we're doing, we're not going to be using those at the moment. So for most of what you're going to be doing, 1 millimeter is fine. You can also edit the size of the grid, your workspace measurements, the overall size of the grid that you have in front of you, and you can set that to whatever you want. You can also change your measurement unit, but again I think millimeters for most of what you're going to be doing will be absolutely fine. There are presets, but you'll notice that these are 3D printers. And that's where I think this software is, maybe one of the areas that this software is aimed, is to enable you to make models, 3-dimensional models that you can then 3D print. And you can see there you've got MakerBot, which is one of the bigger brands of 3D printers, along with Ultimaker as well. And so at the moment, by default, our work plane is set to 200 millimeters by 200 millimeters. And I think this works well for most things that you're going to be doing. What you may need to do is scale down the object that you are going to be making, your design, to get it to fit into the work plane. But because of the sort of size of this, and because we're working with 1 millimeter, a good scale to use is 1 to 10, and there will be more lessons, and there are some demonstration lessons making furniture, making various pieces of furniture at 1 to 10. Okay, so they are there for you to have a look at as well. Whatever shape you drop in, you will notice that you get this menu here that allows us to change various parts of our shape that we've just dropped in, and you can change the measurements, okay, using these boxes or using these sliders. It's another method that we can use to change the various dimensions. Okay, We can also round the corners, and there is a few issues with this, and I'll come on to this in another lesson. But when we put a radius on, it's essentially putting it onto the cube. So when you do it, if you stretch the object, you also stretch the radius, so just be aware of that when you are using this as a program. Okay, when you're using this to create things. What it does mean is that we sometimes have to think a bit more carefully about the order in which we're going to do things, and think about how we're going to, or the approach we're going to take to create the final shape or the final design that we want. Okay, we can also change it to a hole, which we can then use to cut away from another shape, and I'll demonstrate that in a moment. And you can also change the color. There are various colors that you can use as well. Okay, so we do have those options in there. We've also got the steps option here, and as I alter this, what it does is it increases or decreases the number of steps in the curve. So the higher the number there, the smoother this curve, as you can see there. The lower the number, the more angular it becomes. But again, you could use that to your advantage to create a certain shape, as you can see there. So you could use that to create a angle or chamfer on your shape. And if I want to get rid of that, I can select it. I can either hit the, I'll press the delete key, or I can go up here and I can delete. I've also of course got my undo. Yeah, so we have got those options in there, but we will delete that for now. If I go to a different shape and drag that in, you will see that it has different options. Again, if I bring in another shape, different options. Okay, and I will be exploring more of those in future lessons, and how we can use those. So I'm just going to delete those for the moment, and I'm going to bring in my box again. So if I want to change the size of this, because I can use my grid and snap to my grid, if I want to change this dimension here, you'll notice there is a number box. Just as I move this, you can see the number changing just there, which tells me the size of that dimension, and it will snap to every millimeter, as we just said, on the grid. If I want to, I can select that and I can type in my measurement and press enter, and it will change that for me. Okay, I can do this with the other little black boxes on here, and again I can change the size of this using my mouse or by typing in the number. And I can use this one here. You'll notice there is a white square here with a line, and if I just hover my mouse over it, it tells me the height of my shape, and I can again change that, moving that up and down, and I can either use my mouse or I can type in the number that I want. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of that. I also have the corners. Now if I select a corner, it allows me to alter two dimensions at the same time, and if I press and hold the shift key while I drag that corner box out, you'll notice that it scales all dimensions at the same time. So it changes all three measurements at the same time. If I press Shift and Alt, what you'll notice is that it will do the same thing. It will change and scale all three dimensions, but it does it this time from the center of the object, which again might be quite useful to you at some point. I can also manipulate my shape in the workspace. I can lift it off the workspace using the small, if you can just see this here, that little cone, little black cone on top. I just click and hold that and I move it up, and you'll notice there are two boxes, two number boxes that have now appeared, both on the same value, and you'll also notice there is a line or a dimension line showing me my position, or the position of my shape up from the workplane. If I release that now, you can see we've got two here, and again we can, edit those. If I click off my object now and I click back on it, and again I go back onto this, what you'll notice now is that the dimension here with the line, it shows me the distance of my shape off the workplane. The second box is now different because that is showing me how much I've moved this time. Okay, so this time when I've moved it, if I move that up, okay, to 25, it's 25 off the workplane, but this time I've moved it up a distance of 2 from where it was. So if I do that again, and as I move it now, you can see I've moved it down a distance of 4, or minus 4 from where it was, to give it a distance of 21 off the workplane. So if I drop that back down onto the workplane, you can see it's on 0 again. I can also move, if I want to, below my workplane, and hopefully you can see how that works there as well. I'm just going to bring that back up onto my workplane. You've also got the option to rotate, and you've got these 3 arrows, curved arrows, that we can use to rotate. If you click on it and you drag out, it will allow you to move an individual degree at a time, so you can be very precise with where you want your block to rotate. If you rotate on the inside, let's rotate that to a better angle maybe, it will lock, as it rotates around, so every 22.5 degrees, and that's the same on each of these. It just rotates on a different axis. So it allows you to manipulate your block and position it anywhere you would like. The other thing that we can do, and starts to make this quite useful and quite interesting, is we can create new shapes, new objects, by combining shapes or by removing shapes. So if I was to bring in, for example, a cylinder and position it, okay, I can now combine these two shapes by using the group function. And I would suggest, even if you are bringing in the same kind of shape as you've already got in, so that it's a red colour, it is worth changing the colour that you are using each time you bring something in, because it does make it a little bit easier to see the positioning of our shapes. And if I rotate this, you can hopefully see where they intersect. There is a sort of changing of the colour, almost a shimmer, to show where those shapes are crossing each other or interlocking. If I take it over so it's red on red there, it's a bit harder to see that. You can't really see that. So it's just a little tip or a little tool to help you to be able to manipulate your shapes in the way that you want and to line them up more carefully. And in order to group it, we need to select our objects. We can do this by clicking on one, pressing and holding Shift, clicking on the next shape, and clicking on the next shape. And you will see in the little menu it does tell you that you've got 3 shapes selected. Okay, you can also drag a box around your shapes. And you can drag a box, and as long as that box is touching those shapes, as you can see there, it doesn't have to fully enclose the shapes. You can just touch the shapes with the box, the selection box, and it will select them. Okay. You do need to be a little bit careful when you are using the selection box as you're drawing, as your file, as your design becomes more complicated, because you could accidentally select something you don't mean to by touching it with the selection box. So always check the number of shapes that you've got selected, and you will find that a good check. Okay, good test to make sure that you've got the right number of shapes and the right shapes selected. And once we've got it, what we can then do is we can group it. Just click on the group button, and you'll see now that that has now become one shape. So it doesn't matter which of the individual shapes I click on, it is now one shape. And I can scale it, and I can resize it just as I would before. Okay, but you can get some quite interesting results with this, so be very careful when you do this, so that you don't lose the form of what you want. This is where you need to be very careful in thinking about the order in which you assemble or create your design. And again, if I select out what we have got, if I want to now, it's not quite in the right place, I'm not quite happy with it, I can use the ungroup, and I've still got my individual shapes, as you can see there. And again, if I select it and I'll group it, you'll also notice that it changes to one colour. If I want to maintain the original colours, I can just click on the colour button here. I could change the colour of the overall object, or I can click where it says multicolour, and that will maintain the original colours of the shapes, but hold them or have them or treat them as one shape. Okay, and what I can also then do is use any other shape to add, to combine, to do what I want. If I bring in a, let's bring in a sphere, what I'm going to do is just use the shift key just to alter the size on that, just to make it a little bit smaller. Position it where I want. And this is where you may want to be changing your view to enable you to line things up as you want. You might want to go to a top view. And again, this is where maybe your orthogonal view might be more useful to position something more accurately. So just sort of bear that in mind when you are creating your designs. Manipulate, change your view to enable you to achieve what you want to achieve. And again, I can continue now. I've got my one group. I can also select this, shows it as two shapes, and I can again group it, and I can continue to do this to build up my different shapes. What I can also do is I can change any shape that I drag in. Any of these shapes I can change to a hole. So I can click on that shape there, and if I just go on here and I just select the hole rather than the colour, click on that, and you can see it changes. It becomes sort of a grey transparent. Okay. And now when I group my objects together, what it will do is it will remove material. If again, I'll try this with the cylinder, make it into a hole, group my objects, and it will cut out. And this is one of the the sort of basic functions within this, is to create your design by adding and combining basic shapes, or by using basic shapes to cut away or remove material to create my design. There are some preset holes here. If I bring this in, I can use that, and it's preset as a hole. but it doesn't really matter because you could make any shape that you want into a hole and use that to cut out when you combine your shapes together. Okay, so by grouping we can remove material and do what we want to do. So far we've looked at and used the group and the ungroup tools. We've also got our align tool which we can use, and essentially what this will do, it will align our shapes up using surfaces. If I just resize this block just to illustrate this. So I've got my first shape in, and I'm going to bring in a second shape. Just make that a little bit smaller. Okay, and what I can do is if I select both of my shapes and then go on to the align tool, I get a series of these sort of dots, some black dots, some greyed out, and if you move your mouse pointer over the black dots you will get a preview of where it will move the shapes to. If it's greyed out, as this one is here, it's because those surfaces are already aligned. So you've got the bottom of that and the bottom of that are already aligned, which is why we can't move them. We don't need to move them. If I click on just one of the shapes, you can see the dots will move, and it means that the shape that I've got selected will fix, and the second shape will move to it. And you can see that in the preview. Okay, it's the smaller block that is moving. I click on the smaller block and I then move around the dots, you can see that it's the bigger block that's moving. So if I wanted to line this up with a corner, I can line the back edges and then the side edge, or faces I should say. Same on here. Same on here. Same on here. If I want to align it to the middle, I would select the middle dots. So again, this is quite a useful tool to allow you to manipulate and move your shapes to the position that you want, and also to allow you to work with more accuracy. And the next tool I'm going to have a look at is Mirror, and this essentially allows us to mirror the shape on the work plane. And to illustrate that, I'm just going to use my boxes again, and I'll just create an L shape, because there's always a good shape to use when trying to illustrate any kind of mirroring. So I'm going to group those, so you can see I've got my L shape. Just going to adjust the height, and now that I've got that selected, I can go to my mirror tool, and again you'll see a series of sort of arrows on here that we can then use, and the orange preview when we hover over them. So as I click on those arrows, you can see my shape flips or mirrors. Okay. Mirror tool. There's not much to mirror on that, it looks much the same. But hopefully you can see how that works. This gets more useful maybe if you were to copy it and paste it over, because I can then mirror and create the two halves to a particular part or a particular design. So again, another useful tool is our mirror function. Last thing I'm just going to quickly show you in this lesson is to do with the work planes. I mentioned the work planes earlier. Let's go back to the home view and just rotate around a little bit. So now that I've got a shape on my work plane, I can now add or change the work plane. You'll notice there's a little blue square here that is sort of following my mouse around my work plane, but when I bring it onto this object, it changes to the plane on the object or the shape that I move it to. So if I wanted to work here, I can do that. If I want to work here, I can. If I want to work on here, I can. And even if I want to go back to my original work plane, I can. And one of the advantages of this is it means that I can position something or another shape. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. I can place my next shape on that work plane, and I haven't got to worry about repositioning something. So as you can see there, it has placed it on the top of my cube. If I change my work plane to here, I can position something on that side. If I change my work plane to another side, I can position my shape on there as well. And then still go back to my original work plane. So again, potentially a very useful tool when you are starting to construct and you want to have a bit more control or a bit more accuracy over what you are going to be doing. As I said, there will now be more lessons, so have a watch of those as well as they get made and uploaded, and also have a look at the demonstrations, and hopefully you will be able to pick up using Tinkercad quite easily and be creating some quite interesting stuff. One thing I will just show you as well is on the dashboard. You'll notice it's saving the work there, and this is one thing that's good with Tinkercad. You don't have to keep saving your work, it does it for you automatically. It's all cloud based and you can access any of the files that you've been working on and just tinker on them. But what it does have, which is really useful and well worth a look when you're just starting out, is on your dashboard you've got a Learn tab, and there are various different starters here that you can go on to and have a look, and it takes you through step by step how to do the various actions. Okay, and there are also lessons that you can go through and you can use. If you just click on all lessons, you'll be able to see there's a whole range of different objects, different designs that you could have a go at creating, and it will take you through step by step. Best thing to do is just to have a go, start playing about with the shapes, start playing about with manipulating them, and see where it takes you.